347 years of waiting, debating, and deferring ended with a single act of defiance when humanity walked out of the Galactic Council, leaving behind centuries of bureaucracy to forge a galaxy where problems were no longer managed, but solved. The Grand Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystalline floors, its bioluminescent walls pulsing with the collective heartbeats of 1,000 species. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in their designated atmospheric bubbles, methane breathers beside silicon-based entities, energy beings flickering next to crystalline hive minds. At the center of it all, in a modest section requiring only standard oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, sat the human delegation. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Ambassador Sarah Chen adjusted her simple black suit so plain compared to the elaborate ceremonial garments, carapaces, and energy matrices surrounding her. She had worn it deliberately. Today was not a day for pageantry. The motion before the council, announced Zephyr Prime, the gaseous coordinator, whose voice resonated through universal translators, concerns the territorial dispute between the hegemony of Keth and the crystalline collective regarding mining rights in the Vega 7 system. The familiar dance began. The Keth representative, a towering insectoid creature with mandibles that clicked nervously, presented their case with flowery diplomatic language that said nothing. The collective's response came as harmonized tones that translated into equally meaningless bureaucratic speak. Sarah watched, waited. This had been going on for 347 years. The human species had joined the Galactic Council with such hope, such optimism. They had brought their idealism, their problem-solving ingenuity, their fierce determination to make things better. They had offered solutions, technological innovations, new perspectives on age-old conflicts, and the Council had smiled, nodded, and continued doing exactly what it had always done. Nothing. Perhaps, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the chamber's ambient hum, we could consider the revolutionary concept of actually making a decision. A ripple of discomfort spread through the chamber. Several species shifted in their atmospheric bubbles, while others flickered with what could only be described as nervous energy patterns. Coordinator Zephyr Prime's form undulated uncertainly. Ambassador Chen, the proper protocols require 7 hours of debate followed by referral to a subcommittee that will spend 18 months producing a report recommending further study. Sarah finished. I know the protocols, Coordinator. I've been watching them for longer than most species here have been spacefaring. The Keth representative's mandibles clicked aggressively. The human speaks out of turn. This disrupts the harmony of discourse. Harmony. Sarah stood, and something in her movement made every being in the chamber suddenly very still. Is that what you call the 15 ongoing genocides that this council has been harmoniously discoursing about for the past 50 years? The 17 slave trading operations we've been forming subcommittees to investigate, the complete ecological destruction of 43 worlds that we're still gathering reports on. The silence that followed was absolute. In 3 millennia of council history, no one had ever spoken like this. Sarah reached into her briefcase, such a primitive human device that it drew curious stares and withdrew a simple tablet. The technology was crude by galactic standards, but it contained something that made every council member suddenly wish they were somewhere else. Since humanity joined this council, she continued, her voice carrying the weight of accumulated frustration, we have submitted 847,000 motions for action. Would you like to know how many were acted upon? No one answered. The chamber's bioluminescent walls had dimmed noticeably, responding to the collective stress of its occupants. 63, Sarah said. 63 out of 847,000. Most of those were minor trade disputes that were resolved only because the involved parties got tired of waiting and worked it out themselves. She began walking slowly around the chamber's central speaking area, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. Every eye, sensor, and energy detection apparatus tracked her movement. We submitted detailed plans to end the Crystal and Hegemony War in year 12 of our membership. That war has now claimed 2.7 billion lives. We provided technological solutions to the plague devastating the Outer Rim territories. The death toll is now approaching 40 billion souls. We offered mediation services for the Andromedan Civil War, the Centaur I resource crisis, and the Great Silence of the Machine Worlds. Her voice grew harder with each word. All of these crises continue. All of them worsen. All of them could have been resolved with decisive action. The Zephyrin coordinator's form contracted nervously. Ambassador Chen, you must understand. The Council operates on principles of careful deliberation, of ensuring all perspectives are heard, of ensuring nothing ever gets done. Sarah interrupted. Your careful deliberation has one purpose: maintaining the status quo. No matter how many suffer, no matter how many die, the Council will study, discuss, debate, and defer until the heat death of the universe. A new voice entered the discussion, or rather, a harmonic frequency that translated as words. This came from the collective's primary consciousness node. Human ambassador. It resonated. Your species lacks understanding of the complexities inherent in galactic governance. These issues require nuanced approaches. No, Sarah said flatly. They require someone to make a damn decision and stand by it. The profanity, raw and untranslated, sent shock waves through the chamber. Several species' atmospheric bubbles flickered as their occupants recoiled. You want to know what we've learned in our time here? Sarah's voice carried across the chamber with the authority of absolute conviction. Every single one of you is terrified of taking responsibility. You've built the most elaborate bureaucracy in galactic history for one simple purpose: to ensure that no one ever has to make a hard choice. She gestured to the assembled representatives. The Keth could have resolved their mining dispute with the collective in a single afternoon with honest negotiation. Instead, they prefer to let it fester for decades because that allows them to avoid the political cost of compromise. The collective could end their territorial expansion conflicts by simply communicating their actual needs instead of their perceived entitlements. They won't, because that would require them to admit limitations. The chamber erupted in protests, translated into a cacophony of clicks, harmonics, electromagnetic pulses, and pheromone releases that the universal translators couldn't quite manage. Sarah waited for the noise to die down, and the Zephyrians, she continued, looking directly at the coordinator, have perfected the art of seeming busy while accomplishing nothing. 3,000 years of coordination, and the galaxy is more fractured, more violent, and more unjust than when you started. Coordinator Zephyr Prime's form darkened to an ominous shade. You go too far, human. Your species' aggression is well documented. Perhaps this council serves as a necessary restraint on your warlike nature. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Sarah's smile was not pleasant. Warlike nature, she repeated softly. Yes, let's talk about that. Sarah's tablet projected a holographic display that filled the chamber's center. Star maps, casualty reports, battle analyses, all meticulously documented. Since joining this council, she began, humanity has fought exactly 3 wars. The first was against the Void Hunters when they began consuming inhabited worlds in the Orion sector. We stopped them in 11 months when this council had been monitoring the situation for 40 years. The display shifted to show the aftermath: worlds saved, populations protected, the Void Hunter threat permanently neutralized. The second was when the Machine Collective began forcibly converting organic species in the Cygnus region. We ended that in 6 months. The council was still forming a committee to investigate. Another shift in the display showed freed worlds, liberated populations, the Machine Collective's conversion protocols dismantled. The third was when the hegemony of Keth began systematically exterminating inferior species in the Beta Quadrant. We stopped that genocide in 3 months. The Keth representatives' mandibles clacked frantically. Those were terrorist activities by rogue elements. Your government's official policy. Sarah cut him off. which we have documented in excruciating detail, including the part where the council knew about it and decided to monitor developments. She turned back to address the chamber as a whole. 3 wars in 347 years. Each one fought to protect innocent life. Each one ended quickly and decisively. Each one fought while this council debated, discussed, and did nothing. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Several species shifted nervously in their atmospheric bubbles. But you want to know the real difference between humans and the rest of you. Sarah's voice carried a note of something that made every being present suddenly very aware of their mortality. When we fight to win. We don't fight for territory, or resources, or dominance. We fight for principles. And when something threatens innocent life on our watch, we don't form a committee. We don't schedule hearings. We don't debate the political ramifications. She paused, letting her words sink in. We act. Sarah closed her tablet and placed it back in her briefcase with deliberate care. When she looked up, her expression had changed from frustration to something far more final. 347 years ago, humanity came to this council with hope. We believed in the dream of cooperative galactic governance. We thought that advanced civilizations working together could solve any problem, overcome any challenge, right any wrong. She began walking toward the chamber's exit, her footsteps echoing in the absolute silence. We were wrong. Not about the potential for cooperation, but about your willingness to actually cooperate. You don't want solutions. You want the comfortable illusion of progress without the inconvenience of change. Coordinator's HFY's form flickered urgently. Ambassador Chen, surely we can discuss. No, Sarah said without turning around. We're done discussing. Humanity hereby withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Atmospheric bubbles flickered as their occupants recoiled in shock. Energy beings pulsed erratically. Several methane-breathing species released stress pheromones that fogged their containment fields. You cannot, the Keth representative chittered. The consequences will be your problem, Sarah finished, along with all the other problems you refused to solve. She reached the chamber's exit and turned back one final time. Every being in the vast space was staring at her, their various sensory organs locked onto her small human form. But understand, this, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the 3-kilometer chamber. Humanity's withdrawal from this council doesn't mean we're withdrawing from galactic affairs. It means we're no longer going to ask permission to do what's right. The exit of the human delegation left the Grand Chamber in chaos. For the first time in 3 millennia, the Galactic Council faced a crisis it couldn't defer to a subcommittee. Coordinator HFY attempted to restore order, but the usual protocols seemed inadequate. How did one process the withdrawal of a member species? The bylaws had provisions for expulsion, for suspension, even for voluntary temporary absence, but no one had ever simply left. What are the implications? The crystalline collective harmonized, their usually perfect tonal unity fractured with uncertainty. The question hung in the chamber's process atmosphere like a toxic cloud. Every species present knew the answer, but none wanted to voice it. Humanity didn't need the council. They never had. In their centuries of membership, humans had consistently been net contributors. Their technology, their resources, their solutions to intractable problems all freely shared with council members. They asked for nothing in return but the opportunity to help solve galactic problems, and now they were gone. Perhaps, ventured the Altarian representative, a crystalline being whose thought patterns manifested as geometric shapes, we should consider immediate reforms to address the humans' concerns. It's too late for that, clicked the Keth representative, though his usual arrogance was notably absent. They've made their position clear. Indeed they had. Humanity's final statement wasn't a negotiation tactic or a diplomatic bluff. It was a simple declaration of fact. They would no longer ask permission to do what they believed was right. The implications became clear exactly 6 days later. the mining dispute between the hegemony of Keth and the crystalline collective, the same dispute that had precipitated humanity's withdrawal, was scheduled for its 2847th formal hearing. Representatives from both sides arrived at the designated neutral station. Prepared for another day of productive non-progress, they found human ships waiting for them. Not warships. Humanity had learned that overwhelming force was often counterproductive. Instead, 3 modest science vessels and a single diplomatic cruiser hung in space near the disputed mining facility. Admiral James Park, commanding the diplomatic cruiser Resolution, opened communications with both sides simultaneously. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the same no-nonsense tone that had become humanity's diplomatic signature, "we're here to resolve your mining dispute. You have 2 hours to reach an agreement." The Keth flagship responded first, its captains, mandibles clicking with outrage. "You have no authority here, human. This matter is before the Council." "No," Admiral Park interrupted, "it was before the Council. We left. This matter is now before us, and we have authority because we're the ones with ships and the will to use them." The collective's response came as a harmonic frequency laden with what could only be described as nervous confusion. "Admiral Park, what are your intentions if we cannot reach agreement?" Park's smile was visible through the comm channel. "Simple. We'll reach an agreement for you. The mining rights will be divided equally between your species. The Keth get the northern hemisphere. The collective gets the southern hemisphere. Environmental protections will be enforced by human monitors. Any profits beyond reasonable extraction costs will be shared with the local system's planetary protection fund." "Unacceptable," the Keth captain chittered. "We have prior claims. You have prior claims dating back 400 years that the Council has been debating for decades while the dispute escalated into armed conflict. We're offering you a settlement that gives both sides what they actually need rather than what they think they want." The human admiral's tone remained conversational, but every being monitoring the channel could hear the steel underneath. 1 hour and 57 minutes remaining. What happened next became known throughout the galaxy as the 2-hour peace, the fastest resolution of a major territorial dispute in recorded galactic history. The Keth, faced with humanity's reputation for following through on their statements, began seriously considering the proposed terms for the first time in centuries. The collective, analyzing probability matrices with their vast computational networks, calculated that human intervention offered better outcomes than continued stalemate. 93 minutes later, both sides agreed to the human proposal. The signing ceremony was conducted aboard the Resolution, in a modest conference room that could have fit inside a single atmospheric bubble of the Grand Council chamber. No elaborate protocols, no ceremonial grandeur, no 1,000-year-old traditions to observe, just a species agreeing to share resources and humans ensuring they would keep their word. "This sets a dangerous precedent," the Keth negotiator muttered, as he affixed his species biosignature to the agreement. Admiral Park nodded. "Yes, it does. It establishes the precedent that galactic problems can actually be solved instead of endlessly discussed. Within hours, news of the resolution spread across galactic communication networks. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some species applauded the efficiency, others condemned humanity's interference in galactic affairs. But every government, every faction, every power in the galaxy took note of one crucial fact: when humans said they would act, they acted. The Keth collective resolution was only the beginning. 3 weeks later, human ships appeared in the Andromedan Civil War zone. The conflict had raged for 60 years, splitting the Andromedan species into 12 warring factions while the Council formed committees to study the situation. Admiral Sarakim, commanding the Human Intervention Fleet, broadcast a simple message to all factions: "You have 48 hours to agree to a ceasefire and begin peace negotiations. After that, we start choosing sides." The Andromedans had studied humanity's military history. They knew what choosing sides meant when humans were involved. 41 hours later, every Andromedan faction agreed to attend peace talks. The negotiations took place on a human hospital ship in neutral space. No grand chambers, no atmospheric bubbles, no elaborate ceremonies, just representatives sitting around a table, working through their differences with human mediators who had one simple rule. Every proposal had to benefit the Andromedan people as a whole, not just individual factions. The peace treaty was signed 18 days later. The Andromedan Civil War, the conflict that had claimed 300 million lives while the Council monitored developments, was over, but the galaxy was just beginning to understand what humanity's withdrawal from the Council really meant. The Grand Council convened an emergency session, its bioluminescent walls pulsing with the collective anxiety of 1,000 species. The agenda contained only one item, the human problem. Coordinator Zephyr Prime's form had darkened to an almost opaque shade, reflecting the gravity of the situation. In 6 months since humanity's withdrawal, they announced, they have resolved for major conflicts, ended to genocidal campaigns, and established 3 new trade agreements that have increased commerce in their affected regions by 400%. The statistics were damning. In half a year, humanity had accomplished more than the Council had in the previous century. They're making us look irrelevant, harmonize the crystalline collective, their usual perfect tones fractured with whirring. We are irrelevant, click the Keth representative. While we debate, they act. While we study, they solve. While we coordinate, they conclude. The chamber fell silent as the implication sank in. Species that had spent millennia hiding behind the Council's elaborate bureaucracy suddenly faced uncomfortable truth. Other civilizations were watching, and they were beginning to wonder why they needed the Council at all. There have been inquiries, admitted the Altarian representative, geometric patterns of distress flickering around their crystalline form. 17 species have requested information about the procedures for withdrawing from Council membership. The silence that followed was deafening. We must bring the humans back, declared the hegemony of Keth's new representative. The previous one had been recalled in disgrace after the mining dispute resolution. We must offer them concessions, perhaps even Council leadership positions. They won't come back, said Coordinator Zephyr Prime quietly. And they don't want to lead us. They want us to lead ourselves. While the Council debated, humanity continued to act. The plague that had devastated the Outer Rim territories for 40 years, the one the Council had been monitoring with growing concern, was eliminated in 4 months. Human medical teams, working with species who had abandoned hope of Council intervention, developed treatment protocols and distribution networks that reached every affected world. The death toll, which had been climbing toward 50 billion, stopped. For the first time in 4 decades, the plague spread was not just contained, but reversed. The machine collectives' forced conversion programs, the ones the Council had been investigating for 30 years, ended when human negotiators offered the machines something the Council never had: genuine partnership in creating hybrid organic synthetic societies where both forms of intelligence could thrive. The Void Hunters, supposedly extinct after humanity's first intervention, had actually retreated to dark space and begun rebuilding. The Council's monitoring stations detected their return, but followed standard protocol: form a committee to assess the threat level. Humanity detected them too. Within a week, human deep space interdiction fleets were moving to intercept the Void Hunter staging areas. The renewed threat was eliminated before most galactic governments even knew it existed. Each success sent the same message throughout the galaxy. There was an alternative to the Council's endless deliberation. There was a species that would act decisively when action was needed, and that terrified the Council more than any external threat ever had. 2 years after humanity's withdrawal, the Grand Council faced its greatest crisis in 3 millennia. Mass defection. It started with the Rim Alliance, 37 species from the galaxy's outer territories who had grown tired of watching their problems ignored while the core worlds debated. They formally withdrew from the Council and established the Frontier Compact, with humanity as a consulting partner. Then the Trade Federation, 49 commercial species who realized that human-mediated agreements were faster, fairer, and more profitable than council-regulated commerce announced their own withdrawal. The younger species, those who had joined the council within the last 1,000 years, began forming their own cooperative agreements. They called it the Active Response Alliance, and its founding principle was simple: when problems arise, fix them. Within 6 months, the Galactic Council had lost nearly 40% of its membership. Coordinator Zephyr Prime stood before the diminished assembly, their form barely maintaining cohesion as they delivered what everyone knew was a final address. "We have lost control," they admitted, "not through conquest or revolution, but through irrelevance. The galaxy has learned that problems can be solved, that decisions can be made, that governance can actually govern." The remaining representatives sat in their atmospheric bubbles, contemplating the dissolution of the oldest political institution in galactic history. "The humans were right," continued the coordinator. "We built the most elaborate system in the galaxy for avoiding responsibility, and when someone showed that responsibility could be embraced rather than avoided, our entire foundation cracked. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss." The message arrived at United Earth Government headquarters exactly 3 years after Ambassador Saracen had walked out of the Grand Council chamber. It was addressed to the Secretary General of Earth, transmitted through official diplomatic channels, and signed by every remaining member of the Galactic Council. It was simple, direct, and unprecedented. To the government of Earth and the human species, the Galactic Council formally requests the return of humanity to Council membership. "We acknowledge that our previous methods were insufficient to address the galaxy's needs. We are prepared to implement fundamental reforms to Council structure and procedures, based on human recommendations. We understand if you decline this invitation. Your actions over the past 3 years have demonstrated that you do not need us. But we believe the galaxy needs both human decisiveness and the broader perspective that comes from inclusive governance. We await your response." Secretary General Martinez read the message 3 times before calling her advisors. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The council that had spent centuries avoiding decisions was now begging for the return of the species that actually made them. The response, when it came, was pure humanity, direct, practical, and conditional. 2. The Galactic Council, we will return, but not as members. We will return as partners in a new organization with new rules. When a crisis arises, we address it immediately. When a decision is needed, we make it within reasonable timeframes. When someone requests help, we provide it without endless bureaucratic delays. If you can agree to this, we can work together. If not, we'll continue working without you. The choice is yours. You have 30 days to decide. Secretary General Elena Martinez. United Earth Government Grand Assembly of Galactic Cooperation held its first session on New Geneva Station, a human-built facility in neutral space. The chamber was smaller than the old council's grand hall. It could accommodate only 200 species rather than 1,000, but it buzzed with something the old council had never possessed: urgency. There were no atmospheric bubbles. Advanced environmental controls maintained conditions suitable for all member species in a shared space. Representatives sat at simple tables arranged in concentric circles, with humans occupying no special position. They were simply another species among equals. The first agenda item was the Centauri resource crisis, a dispute that had been under review by the old council for 8 years. Under the new rules, it had to be resolved within 2 weeks. It was settled in 4 days. The second item was a request for humanitarian assistance from the Beta sector, where a stellar collapse threatened 6 inhabited systems. The old council would have spent months debating whether intervention was appropriate. Relief fleets launched within hours of the request. Ambassador Saracen, now serving as Earth's representative to the new organization, watched the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. This was what they had always hoped the galaxy could become: not perfect, but functional. Not without disagreement, but with the will to act despite disagreement. The old council ruled through consensus. she explained to a group of new members during a recess. Consensus sounds wonderful in theory, but in practice it means the most cautious voice always wins. The new assembly operates on informed majority decisions with minority rights protections. It's messy, but it works, and it did work. In its first year, the assembly resolved more crises than the old council had addressed in the previous decade. 5 years later, Ambassador Chen stood in the memorial hall of the Grand Council chamber, now a museum on the Zephyrian homeworld. The vast space that had once hosted the galaxy's most powerful beings was quiet, its bioluminescent walls dim, its atmospheric bubbles empty. A young Zephyrian approached her, their form flickering with the rapid patterns that indicated curiosity. In their species, Ambassador Chen, they communicated, I have studied the historical records. Why did your species not simply leave earlier? Why endure centuries of frustration? Sarah smiled, looking up at the empty speaking platform where she had delivered humanity's final statement to the old order. Because leaving was never the goal, she said. The goal was always to make things better. We tried to work within the system, to reform it from inside. But sometimes, to save an institution, you have to be willing to abandon it. The young Zephyrian's pattern shifted to what she had learned indicated understanding. And by leaving, you forced change. We forced a choice. Sarah corrected. Change was always possible. The old council chose to avoid it. When we left, everyone else had to choose to maintain a comfortable but useless status quo, or build something that actually worked. They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the echoes of 3 millennia of ineffective governance. The galaxy is better now, the young Zephyrian observed. The galaxy is better because people decided to make it better, Sarah replied. Humans didn't solve the galaxy's problems. We just refused to pretend they couldn't be solved. Dr. Marcus Webb, professor of xenopolitical history at the University of Luna, concluded his famous lecture series, The Council Transition, a study in institutional evolution, with these words: humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council was not an act of aggression, isolationism, or arrogance. It was an act of faith that the galaxy's species were capable of better governance than they were receiving. The old council failed not because its members were incompetent or malicious, but because they had become so afraid of making wrong decisions that they stopped making decisions at all. They confused process with progress, deliberation with action, consensus with leadership. Humanity's contribution to galactic civilization was not superior technology, military might, or diplomatic cunning. It was something far more revolutionary. The simple belief that problems exist to be solved, not managed. That governance should govern, not merely coordinate. That when someone needs help, the appropriate response is to help them, not to form a committee to study whether help is warranted. The fear that spread through the galaxy after humanity's withdrawal was not fear of human power, but fear of human expectations. For the first time in millennia, the galaxy's species were confronted with the possibility that their governments could actually work. Some rose to meet that challenge, others clung to familiar dysfunction, but none could ignore the question that humanity had posed simply by walking away. If not now, when? If not us, who? The answer, as it turned out, was now, and us. The most radical act in politics is not revolution, it is the expectation that government should actually solve problems. Sarah Chen, former ambassador to the Galactic Council,